What if I told you that a single empire once ruled over nearly a quarter of the world's population, and yet it began with just 12,000 men crossing a river under a blood-red sky? What if I told you that the same dynasty that built the world's most beautiful tomb also burned its rivals alive in molten gold? This is the story of the Mughal Empire, a civilization of emperors and poets, diamonds and betrayals, palaces and revolutions. From the throne of Babur, who rode down from the mountains of Central Asia, to the glittering Peacock Throne of Shah Jahan, whose jewel-encrusted seat symbolized the empire's unmatched splendor. The Mughals turned India into the richest land on earth, a subcontinent where art, science, and power merged into one. But behind the gold and marble lay something darker: endless wars, family betrayals, and the empire's slow decay into dust. Today, we'll journey through the entire history of the Mughal Empire, from its fierce rise to its tragic fall. And by the end, you'll see why the echoes of this empire still shape South Asia today. Now, let's begin where it all started, with blood, ambition, and destiny. The empire born in exile, Babur and the dream of Hindustanate, was the winter of 1525. A bitter wind swept across the icy passes of the Hindu Kush mountains. A man stood there, wrapped in furs, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His name was Zahir ad-Din Muhammad Babur, a descendant of Timur the Lame and Genghis Khan, and at that moment, he was a king without a kingdom, born in the rugged valleys of Fergana, in what is now Uzbekistan. Babur had inherited little more than a crumbling fortress and a famous bloodline. His father's death had left him surrounded by enemies, cousins plotting rebellion, Uzbek warlords closing in, and the ghost of Timur's empire mocking him from afar. But Babur had something few others possessed: a dream. A dream of reclaiming his ancestors' glory and building an empire that would surpass them all. From the start, life tested him cruelly. At just 12, he took his first throne and lost it within months. He became a fugitive, wandering from city to city, betrayed by his own allies. Yet every defeat only hardened him. In his memoir, the Baburnama, he wrote, "The world is not mine, but the courage to win it is." That courage led him east, toward a land whispered in legends, Hindustan, the land of gold, elephants, and opportunity. It was said that the Delhi Sultanate, once mighty, had grown weak under its ruler Ibrahim Lodi, a tyrant who ruled through fear, not loyalty. To Babur, it was an invitation written by fate itself. He began gathering an army minus 12,000 men. Fierce Central Asian horsemen armed with matchlocks and cannons, weapons unknown to most Indian armies of the time. With every march south, his legend grew. Villages whispered of the lion from Kabul, a man who could shoot arrows with both hands while galloping at full speed. By April 1526, he stood face to face with destiny at the Battle of Panipat. Before him to 100,000 soldiers under Ibrahim Lodi. Behind him, just 12,000 men and a handful of cannons. The odds were impossible, but Babur was not a man who feared numbers. He studied his enemy, laid out trenches and carts in defensive lines, and prepared to unleash a weapon few on the subcontinent had ever faced before: gunpowder. At dawn, the ground trembled as cannon fire split the morning air. Smoke covered the fields. Elephants panicked and crushed their own lines. Within hours, the Delhi Sultanate, centuries old, had fallen. Ibrahim Lodi was dead on the battlefield, Babur stood victorious. The Mughal Empire had been born in the roar of cannons and the ashes of an old world, but as the dust settled over Panipat, Babur did not celebrate. In his diary he wrote, "There was no joy in this victory. I found no delight in kingship," because Babur knew conquering Hindustan was only the beginning. Ruling it would be far harder. He would face rebellions, betrayal, and the vast challenge of governing a land where every region spoke a different tongue, prayed to different gods, and followed different kings. But from those struggles, a dynasty of emperors would rise, each one shaping the destiny of South Asia for centuries to come. And one of them would change everything, a boy named Akbar. The boy who became emperor, Akbar, and the age of tolerance. Imagine being crowned an emperor before you could even hold a sword. That was the fate of a child named Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, who became ruler of the Mughal Empire at just 13 years old, an empire already on the verge of collapse. It was the year 1556. Babur's empire, once won by cannon and courage, now stood in ruins. His son Humayun had been driven out by the Afghan ruler Sher Shah Suri, losing Delhi, Agra, and nearly his life. For 15 years, the Mughals wandered in exile, until Humayun, through cunning and Persian alliances, reclaimed the throne. But his victory was short-lived. One cold evening in Delhi, Humayun was hurrying down the library steps of his palace when he tripped on his long robe, fell headfirst, and died instantly. Fate, once again, played its cruel game with the Mughals, and so the crown passed to his young son, Akbar, a boy who, at the time, was hiding in the fort of Kellanore, under the guardianship of one of the most remarkable men in Indian history, Bairam Khan. When the news of Humayun's death reached them, Bairam Khan wasted no time. He called the court together, wrapped the imperial turban around Akbar's head, and proclaimed, "The son of Humayun shall rule in his father's place." But not everyone agreed. Enemies gathered quickly. The Afghan king Hemu, a brilliant general, was already marching toward Delhi with 50,000 men. The empire's survival now depended on a boy who was barely a teenager and a regent who fought like a lion. In November 1556, at the Second Battle of Panipat, the fate of the Mughal dynasty once again hung by a thread. The Mughals were outnumbered, their young emperor watching anxiously from the rear as Bairam Khan commanded the front lines. As the dust rose, the battle seemed lost. Hemu's war elephants crushed Mughal ranks. But then, a single arrow, fired by an unknown soldier, struck Hemu in the eye. Chaos erupted in the Afghan army. In that moment, Bairam Khan charged forward, seized victory, and shouted, "The empire lives!" Akbar was safe. The throne was secure. But history was only beginning to write his legend. As Akbar grew older, he proved himself unlike any ruler before him. He could not read or write, yet his mind was sharper than any scholar's. He listened, questioned, and learned. He surrounded himself with thinkers, poets, mystics, and generals from every faith. While most rulers of his age built walls of religion and caste, Akbar began tearing them down. He invited Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and Jains to debate in his court. In the glittering palace of Fatehpur Sikri, he built the Ibadat Khana, the house of worship, where priests and philosophers argued about God late into the night. One evening, as thunder rolled outside, Akbar asked a simple question that silenced the hall. If God made us all, Why do we fight in his name? That question defined his rule. He abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims, allowed freedom of worship, and even married Hindu princesses, treating them as equals rather than trophies. His closest ally became Raja Man Singh, a Rajput warrior whose loyalty would help unite northern India. For the first time, Hindustan was not just conquered, it was truly governed. But Akbar's brilliance wasn't limited to politics. He was a visionary builder and administrator. The empire's heart pulsed with a new rhythm: trade, art, architecture, and law. He divided his empire into provinces, each with governors and revenue ministers, a system so efficient that traces of it survive in modern India's bureaucracy today. He built cities that shimmered like mirages, none more famous than Fatehpur Sikri, carved from red sandstone with palaces, courtyards, and the Grand Buland Darwaza, whose Persian inscription still proclaims, "The world is a bridge, pass over it, but build not your house upon it." Under his reign, Persian, Turkish, and Indian art fused into something new: Mughal culture. Painters depicted court life in vibrant detail. Musicians filled the air with ragas. And across the empire, roads connected cities. Caravans carried silk and spices, and merchants whispered of Akbar's India, a land where gold and justice flowed hand in hand. But every golden age hides its storms. In the quiet corridors of his palace, something began to trouble Akbar. His own son, Selim the prince, had grown restless. The boy, later known as Jahangir, craved power and wine more than wisdom. While Akbar meditated on peace, his heir plotted rebellion. One night, a messenger arrived breathless before the emperor. "Your Majesty," he said, "the prince has declared himself king." The heir went cold. Akbar could have crushed him, but he didn't. Instead, he sent word, "Tell Salim, I forgive him. He is my blood, and my empire shall not be built on a father's curse." That mercy defined Akbar as much as his victories. When he died in 1605, his empire stretched from Afghanistan to Bengal, a land larger than all of Western Europe combined. The Mughal flag flew over cities that glowed with wealth, where art, faith, and power coexisted in fragile harmony. They called him Akbar the Great. But for the people, he was something more: Jalaluddin, the light of the world. Yet as his body was carried to rest in Sikandra, one question lingered: could anyone live up to his legacy? Because his son, Jahangir, would soon take the throne, and behind the veil of his grandeur, love and addiction would shape the empire's fate in ways no one could predict. Jahangir and Nur Jahan, the empire of love and shadows. Have you ever heard of an emperor who nearly lost his crown to love? A love so powerful, so intoxicating, that it turned palaces into prisons and a woman into the most powerful figure in the empire? This is not legend, it's the story of Jahangir and Nur Jahan, the royal lovers who ruled the Mughal throne not with war, but with beauty, intrigue, and ambition. The year was 1605. The empire mourned the death of Akbar the Great. The palaces of Agra were draped in white silk, their corridors echoing with prayers. But behind the mourning, an invisible storm brewed. Akbar's son, Prince Selim, now took the throne as Emperor Jahangir, Caesar of the world. Yet even as the crown touched his head, many whispered that he was no Akbar, that he lacked his father's brilliance and carried instead the burdens of rebellion, addiction, and guilt. Jahangir was a man of contradictions. He could command armies with the same ease he painted flowers. He adored art and justice but was enslaved by opium and wine. He had the heart of a poet and the temper of a storm god in the early years of his reign. He tried to live up to his father's ideals. He promised fairness and established the famous chain of justice outside his palace, a golden chain that any citizen could pull to demand the emperor's attention. It was a symbol of accessibility, a promise that no voice in his empire would go unheard. And yet, even as justice rang through the empire, shadows deepened in the emperor's soul. He longed for something more, something to quiet the restlessness that years of guilt and indulgence had left inside him. That something appeared one spring evening in the royal gardens of Agra. Her name was Mehran Nissa, the daughter of a Persian nobleman who had served in Akbar's court. She was a widow, known for her intelligence and grace, a woman who spoke softly, but whose gaze could command silence. Jahangir saw her across a courtyard, her hand tracing the edge of a rose petal, and in that moment, the emperor was undone. Their love story would soon shake the empire to its core. At first, the court resisted. How could an emperor marry a widow? But Jahangir was not a man who took orders, not even from his own advisors. He made Mehran Nissa his queen, giving her a new name, Nur Jahan, light of the world. And truly, she was. Under her influence, the Mughal court transformed. The once turbulent emperor found clarity and strength in her counsel. Together, they ruled like twin stars, with Nur Jahan's intelligence and political cunning guiding Jahangir's indecisive nature. She issued royal orders in her name, minted coins bearing her image, and even sat beside the emperor during court audiences, something no woman had ever done in Mughal history. But where there is power, envy follows like a shadow. The courtiers whispered that Nur Jahan was a witch, that she bewitched the emperor's mind. Some claimed that every decision he made, from wars to marriages, bore her invisible signature. Even Jahangir's son, Prince Khurram, began to fear her growing influence. That prince would later become known to history as Shah Jahan, the man who built the Taj Mahal. As Nur Jahan's authority rose, Khurram's pride burned. She had other plans for succession. She wanted her own son-in-law, Shah, to inherit the throne after Jahangir. The empire that Akbar had united through tolerance was now fracturing from within, torn between love, ambition, and fear. The first cracks appeared when Jahangir's health began to fail. His dependence on opium deepened, and the once powerful emperor often spent his days in intoxicated haze, lost between dreams and memories. Nur Jahan, however, grew sharper, more calculating. She controlled petitions, managed ministers, and even commanded armies when rebellions broke out. One rebellion came from within the family. Prince Khurram, tired of being sidelined, raised a standard of revolt. The empire plunged into civil war, son against father, wife against heir. The battles raged across the north. In Lahore, Nur Jahan took personal command of imperial forces, leading soldiers from the ramparts. She was no passive consort. She was a strategist, issuing orders with the precision of a general. At one point, she rode into battle herself, veiled but armed, a sight that stunned her enemies. But victory came at a cost. Jahangir, weakened and weary, could no longer hold the empire together. He was captured by rebels, and for the first time, the Emperor of Hindustan became a prisoner. When Nur Jahan heard the news, she did the unthinkable. Disguised as a merchant's wife, she led a daring rescue mission into the rebel camp. The plan was as reckless as it was brave, but somehow, through a mix of wit, gold, and sheer courage, she succeeded. Jahangir was freed, yet the empire would never be the same. When Jahangir finally returned to power, he was a ghost of the man he once was. His health crumbled, his strength waned, and his empire trembled at the edge of chaos. The love that had once lit the court now flickered in the twilight of his days. In 1627, as the cold winds swept through Kashmir, Jahangir's heart gave out. His final words were whispered in Persian, "Farewell, the world, the wine cup is empty." Nur Jahan buried him in Lahore in a tomb of simple elegance. Unlike the grand mausoleums that would follow, his was modest, a reflection of a man who had sought beauty but found sorrow. Nur Jahan lived on, her power fading as the new emperor, Shah Jahan, ascended the throne. She retired into silence, building gardens and writing poetry, her legend turning from queen to myth. But her story left a mark that would echo through centuries, the idea that love could shape an empire, and ambition could destroy it. And as the empire shifted into new hands, a new dream began to form, one of marble, love, and eternal remembrance. For Shah Jahan, Nur Jahan's stepson, had witnessed both his father's indulgence and his stepmother's brilliance. He had seen love's beauty and its ruin, and when love found him, it would lead him to build something the world had never seen before, a monument so perfect it would defy time itself. Yet before that dream could rise, it would be born from tragedy, a tragedy that would carve both the empire and Shah Jahan's soul in stone. The Mughal Empire was about to enter its golden age, the age of the Taj Mahal, but also the beginning of its curse. Shah Jahan, the emperor who built eternity. They say some empires are built by warriors and some by dreamers. Shah Jahan was both. But what he built was neither a fortress nor a kingdom. It was a love story carved in stone, so powerful that it outlived every dynasty, every war, and every emperor who ever sat on the Peacock Throne. The year was 1628. The empire was still trembling from the chaos left behind by Jahangir's death. Princes turned against one another, generals shifted loyalties like sand in the wind, and the court waited, silent, to see who would wear the crown. Then, like thunder splitting the clouds, one man emerged victorious. Prince Khurram, now crowned Shah Jahan, ascended the throne in a ceremony of unmatched splendor. The empire's drums echoed through Agra as elephants in jeweled armor marched past banners of gold and crimson. The Mughal court glittered like the heavens themselves, and at its center stood a man whose name would soon become legend. Shah Jahan was not just a conqueror. He was a perfectionist. His very name meant king of the world, and he believed it. He envisioned an empire of symmetry, not just in architecture, but in life itself. Every garden, every dome, every law was meant to mirror divine harmony. But behind that symmetry lay an equally powerful force, his heart. Because Shah Jahan was a man consumed by love. Her name was Arjamand Banu Begum, better known to the world as Mumtaz Mahal, chosen one of the palace. When he first saw her, she was barely 15, her laughter like music in a garden scented with jasmine. He, already a prince, was captivated instantly. They married 5 years later, and in the 2 decades that followed, she became his constant companion, in war, in governance, and in every quiet moment of his reign. Mumtaz wasn't just his queen. She was his confidant, his advisor, his equilibrium. It was said that he trusted her judgment more than any minister's, and that her presence could calm even his fiercest moods. Wherever Shah Jahan went, whether in royal procession or battle, Mumtaz was by his side, her tent pitched beside his. For years, their reign was a time of prosperity and order. The Mughal Empire stretched from the Deccan Plateau to the snow-capped Himalayas, its cities overflowing with merchants and poets, with scholars and craftsmen. The capital, Agra, was transformed into a jewel of civilization. Then, in 1631, that golden light dimmed forever, while accompanying Shah Jahan on a campaign in Burhanpur. Mumtaz went into labor, her 14th child. For 3 days, the imperial tent echoed with prayers and cries. And then, as the rain fell over the Deccan fields, Mumtaz Mahal, the heart of the empire, breathed her last. They say when Shah Jahan heard the news, he screamed her name until his voice broke. He locked himself away for days, refusing food, sleep, or counsel. His beard turned white within weeks. The man who once ruled the world with command and precision was shattered. When he finally emerged, he had one purpose left: to build a tomb worthy of his love. And so began the most ambitious project in human history. He summoned architects from Persia, calligraphers from Samarkand, masons from Rajasthan, and artisans from across Asia. The Yamuna River was redirected to bring water for the marble foundations. 1,000 elephants carried stone and jewels. For over 22 years, 20,000 workers labored day and night. And what rose from the dust of Agra was not merely a monument, it was a miracle. The Taj Mahal, its white marble shone under the moon like frozen music. Its dome seemed to float against the sky, and its reflection in the river appeared like a vision of paradise itself. The verses of the Quran inscribed on its walls spoke of eternity and reunion. Inside, the emperor placed the body of his beloved, wrapped in silk and perfumed with amber. When Shah Jahan entered the mausoleum for the first time, he whispered, "If paradise exists on earth, it is here, it is here." But fate, as always, had its cruel humor. Even as the Taj Mahal rose, storms brewed within his own palace walls. His sons, Dara Shikoh, Aurangzeb, Murad, and Shah Shuja, began to plot against each other. Each believed he was destined to rule. The emperor, consumed by grief and devotion, failed to see the knives being drawn around him. Dara Shikoh, the eldest, was a philosopher and dreamer like Akbar. He translated Sanskrit texts into Persian, seeking harmony between Hindu and Muslim faiths. Shah Jahan adored him. He saw in Dara the reflection of Akbar's wisdom. But Aurangzeb, the third son, was of a different fire. He was disciplined, austere, and ruthlessly devout. To him, the empire had grown weak with art, luxury, and tolerance. He believed it was his divine duty to restore purity, even if it meant betrayal. By 1657, the emperor fell ill. Whispers spread across the court that Shah Jahan was dying. One by one, his sons declared themselves emperor. Civil war tore through the empire once again, brother against brother, faith against faith. In the chaos, Aurangzeb seized his chance. He defeated Dara Shikoh's forces, capturing the beloved heir and dragging him through the streets of Delhi in chains. The scholars begged for mercy. Aurangzeb showed none. He accused Dara of heresy for embracing Hindu philosophy and ordered his execution. They say Shah Jahan, imprisoned in the Agra fort, heard the news and wept silently, staring at the white dome of the Taj Mahal in the distance. For 8 years, the once mighty emperor lived in that prison, not a dungeon, but a gilded cage. From his marble window, he could see the monument he had built for his lost love, glowing in the moonlight. Sometimes his daughter Jahanara Begum would find him sitting there, murmuring prayers, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When he died in 1666, his body was quietly carried across the river and buried beside Mumtaz Mahal, 2 souls reunited in death. Beneath the marble canopy of eternity, the Taj Mahal stood as both his triumph and his tragedy, the perfect symbol of the Mughal Empire itself, magnificent, romantic, but fatally burdened by its own beauty. And now, the throne passed to Aurangzeb, the empire's last great emperor, a man who would trade art for austerity, tolerance for conquest, and splendor for steel. He would rule longer than any Mughal before him, command more land than even Akbar, and yet, in his reign, the empire's heart would finally begin to crack, for Aurangzeb's empire would shine like a sword, and then break like glass. Aurangzeb, the empire of iron and faith. Have you ever seen a man win the world and lose his soul? That is the tragedy of Aurangzeb Alamgir, the emperor who stretched the Mughal Empire to its greatest size, yet watched it crumble beneath the weight of his own convictions. His was not a reign of gold and poetry, but of fire, conquest, and quiet sorrow. If Shah Jahan built eternity in marble, Aurangzeb forged it in steel, and in the end, both turned to dust. The year was 1658. The empire bled from within. Brothers murdered brothers, soldiers switched sides, and cities burned as the sons of Shah Jahan fought for the Peacock Throne. In this chaos, one man stood apart, silent, cold, calculating. Aurangzeb, the third son, who called himself Alamgir, conqueror of the world. He defeated his brothers one by one. Shah Shuja fled east and vanished into the jungles of Arakan. Murad was lured into an alliance, betrayed, and executed. Dara Shikoh, the beloved heir, scholar, and dreamer, was paraded through Delhi in chains. When his father begged for mercy, Aurangzeb replied, "Justice is the will of God." And with that, he signed his brother's death warrant. Dara was executed, and his severed head was sent to their imprisoned father as proof of victory. It was not ambition alone that drove Aurangzeb, it was faith. He believed himself chosen by God to restore Islam's purity in an empire he thought corrupted by indulgence and idolatry. And so began one of the most controversial reigns in world history, an age of both discipline and darkness. At first, Aurangzeb ruled wisely. He ended wasteful spending, simplified court ceremonies, and reformed administration. The empire's treasury, drained by Shah Jahan's grand projects, began to fill again. He studied law by candlelight and personally oversaw the compilation of the Fatawa-i-Alamgiri, a massive code of Islamic jurisprudence, but soon his zeal hardened into intolerance. He reimposed the jizya tax on non-Muslims, the very tax Akbar had abolished to unite his subjects. Temples were torn down, music was banned from court, and the vibrant pluralism of Akbar's age faded into silence. The poets who once filled the Mughal palaces left for Persia. The musicians packed away their instruments. Yet even as he turned from art, Aurangzeb never turned from conquest. His armies marched across the Deccan, battling the sultans of Bijapur and Golconda. Then the rising Marathas, whose leader, Shivaji Bansal, would become the emperor's fiercest nemesis. Shivaji was everything Aurangzeb's empire feared: bold, unpredictable, and deeply loved by his people. A mountain king who struck like lightning, vanished like wind, and built a new kind of kingdom, not of palaces, but of loyalty and spirit. For years, the Marathas harassed Mughal supply lines, ambushed caravans, and raided fortresses. When Shivaji finally agreed to visit the Mughal court, Aurangzeb planned to bind him in golden chains. But Shivaji saw through the trap. Legend says he faked illness, hid in a fruit basket, and escaped the imperial camp under the cover of night, vanishing into the hills like a ghost. From that day, Aurangzeb swore vengeance, and the Deccan became his battlefield for the next 4 decades. But while his empire expanded on maps, it shrank in spirit. The more Aurangzeb conquered, the more resistance he faced. Rajputs rebelled in the north, Sikhs rose in Punjab, and the Marathas, led now by Shivaji's son Sambhaji, struck deeper than ever. The emperor's armies stretched thin, their victories turning hollow. Years turned into decades. The once vibrant Mughal court grew cold. The palaces echoed with silence, the music of Akbar's time replaced by the rustle of prayer beads and the sound of marching boots. Even his family fell apart. His sons quarreled, generals betrayed him, and provinces slipped away like sand through his fingers. Aurangzeb, who had ruled for nearly half a century, began to see his empire not as a garden, but as a graveyard of his own making. In his final years, he wandered through his camp in the Deccan old, thin, dressed in simple cotton, sleeping on the bare ground. He refused the luxuries of his court and wrote his own epitaph in his diary. "I came alone, I go as a stranger. I know not who I am, nor what I have done." He died in 1707 at the age of 88 in a small tent near Ahmednagar. His final wish was to be buried in a simple grave, without marble or gold, a mound of earth covered only by grass. The man who ruled the largest empire in India's history was laid to rest without a dome, without a nameplate, without a throne. And with his death, the Mughal Empire began to die too. Within years, rebellions erupted across the land. Governors declared independence. The Marathas stormed north and captured Delhi. The empire that had once commanded half the world's wealth became a patchwork of warring states. The Peacock Throne, once the symbol of imperial majesty, was looted by the Persians in 1739. The British East India Company crept in under the guise of trade and slowly, cunningly began to rule. The last Mughal, Bahadur Shah II, would die a prisoner in exile after the revolt of 1857, the Emperor of Hindustan, reduced to a poet in chains. And yet, even as the empire crumbled, its spirit refused to vanish. The architecture, the poetry, the language, the food, all of it became the heartbeat of the subcontinent. The Mughal legacy was not buried with Aurangzeb. It lived on in the rhythm of Urdu ghazals, in the shimmer of marbled domes, in the scent of roses drifting through Delhi's old streets. The Mughals had come as conquerors, ruled as visionaries, and left as legends. From Babur's cannons at Panipat to Shah Jahan's shimmering Taj Mahal, their story was one of ambition and beauty, love and loss, devotion and destruction. And somewhere in that story lies a truth that empires no matter how mighty, are still built by human hands and human hearts. The Peacock Throne may be gone. The palaces may have fallen. But the dream remains, carved into stone, written in verse, and whispered by history itself. Perhaps that is what Babur foresaw when he crossed the mountains all those centuries ago. He did not just conquer a kingdom, he began a legend. And so, the story of the Mughal Empire ends not with a fall, but with an echo, one that still lingers in every corner of the Indian subcontinent, reminding us that glory and impermanence are the twin faces of history's crown.